welcome to my channel. My name is Nat, and today I'll be doing the August wrap-up. So without further ado, here is what I read this month. Unfortunately, I don't have all of my books with me because I borrow books from the library, which everyone should do. But the first book I'm going to mention is a reread. I started the month off rereading a series I was introduced to 8 years ago called Matched. After The Hunger Games came out, dystopian was the genre in YA, and I was one of those teenagers who also had to read all of the books. And Match caught my eye because the cover is nice and lime green and it looks really pretty, and when I read it back then I was enamored with it. When I moved to the Netherlands, I finally got my hands on the copy of the sequel, but I never got around to reading it, and it's been on my shelf ever since. So I decided, you know what, it's high time that I finally get myself to reading this sequel. Therefore, I had to reread the book again. Boy oh boy, was it something. Reading this book 8 years or 7 years after I read it first is a completely different experience. It was definitely a book which rode the dystopian wave back in the day, because I could not for the love of me understand why it was as popular as it was back then. The premise is, in a perfect society, after a massive war that destroys the world, including the United States, people are now controlled by society and are given everything and anything that they need by society in the exact amounts that they need, including their future partners. And as you can probably guess, this story follows the tale of a young girl who decides that she wants choice, which is, I guess, a noble enough premise, but ends up just being about her being kind of a dick. I didn't like this book because it didn't seem as if there was any sort of basis to any sort of the character motivations, despite the fact that I still really like dystopian, and I would have thought that this book would have tickled that bit of my brain. It didn't. I am not touching the sequel. I borrowed the third part of the trilogy from the library and promptly returned it after the end of 2 weeks because I'm not touching that. I'm not reading the sequel that I do own. I guess I'm happy that I didn't dedicate all that time that I could have to this book and instead just went and read something else, which I did. And the second book, which I read this month, is The Selection. Well, this is also dystopian, but lo and behold, it is slightly better than Matched, and I actually did get my fix of dystopian from reading this. The premise is actually similar to Matched in that it is picking a future bride for the prince of this new post-apocalyptic Americas in the format of The Bachelor, essentially, except it's dystopian. So this book is essentially dystopian, or The Bachelor, but dystopian. It was slightly better than Matched. The characterization was a lot better. It was a lot more interesting to read about the world because the world actually did get some sort of description, unlike Matched. So overall, it was a really enjoyable read. I definitely want to pick up the sequel, even though I will not pay to reserve to read the sequel because I don't think it's worth 50 cents, but it's the type of light read that I use for tackling book hangovers between the heavier books that I read, the in-betweeny book, essentially. So on to the heavier books of the month. The first one is The Catcher in the Rye, and you can find a video up on my channel, and I'll put a card up here somewhere, to the video essay that I did about Holden Caulfield and what I think the symbolism and meaning of The Catcher in the Rye is in general. In short summary, I started off really disliking the book. I thought it was very pretentious and the writing style isn't actually that enjoyable. But once I stepped back from looking at it like a normal novel and understanding that Holden is a very unreliable narrator, then the book became a lot more interesting. In other words, I understand why it's a classic. The other book that I read was also a classic, and it was The Lord of the Flies. I decided, you know what, it's about time. Let's find out about these awful children and see why this is such a controversial book as it stands today. And I wasn't disappointed. I'm debating on whether to do a full video essay on it, as I did for The Catcher in the Rye, so do let me know if you'd like to hear something like that. By the way, so for those of you who haven't read it, The Lord of the Flies is essentially a take on what would happen to a bunch of prepubescent children if they ended up on a deserted island, and it's not pretty. I'm going to preface this by saying I understand the criticisms that the book has received ever since its publication, especially in the more recent years about,
well, why aren't there any girls?
And
it's actually super racist if you think about it.
And while I agree with these criticisms and that one should analyze literature from a different lens as the world moves on, I think that everybody kind of forgets in the environment that the book was written when it was written. And this is something that I mentioned in my video essay about The Catcher in the Rye. So taking all of that away, I found the raw emotional side of it surprisingly heavy and deep, and I really liked that aspect. The writing didn't impede your understanding of any of the characters, nor did it make them seem overly adult, but at the same time, the childlike logic and brutality and maybe morality was kept very true to what I would perceive it to be. So I really enjoyed it. I think I might want to reread it sometime soon and do a bit more research on Golding's background, but in general, I really liked the book and I think it was a good pickup for this month. But that's it for fiction. The remaining book that I read was nonfiction, and that was I finally finished The Power of Habit. The Power of Habit essentially deals with habits and how they're formed and how we can hack our current habits in order to introduce new ones, as well as looking at habits of both companies and societies as a whole. There isn't really much that I can say about this book in a review since it's nonfiction. I don't agree with the way habits work, but I think that this is a very easily accessible book for a lot of people, and if you want to know more about yourself as well as the way that companies and society conditions us subconsciously and consciously towards different types of habits, then I think this is something that you would be interested in. But that's just my take. So that's it for my August reads. I'm going to add in a bit of something unusual in that I don't see people doing this much, but I'm going to talk about the books that are going with me from August into September, because either I'm reading them really slowly or I'm just savoring them, or they're really big. So to start, it is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is Tudor history from the perspective of Thomas Cromwell, and currently I'm enjoying it immensely, but only after about 150 pages when I finally got used to he being referred to Cromwell and not just he as an individual. So it kind of took a while to figure out who the he Mantel kept referring to, and I found that it kind of breaks up the pace of the book quite a lot, especially at the beginning. But so far so good. I will probably get this finished by the end of September, if only because it's a library book and somebody else is waiting for it. The second is my own book, and it's been on my shelf for about 6 years. Essentially ever since I saw the movie adaptation. This book is something else. I don't want to say anything because I know for a fact that I'm going to be doing a video essay on Cloud Atlas. But I mean, look at the cover first of all. Really enthralling and ethereal. I'm taking my sweet time in understanding and remembering everything that's written, as well as writing down all the vocabulary, because let me tell you, there's a lot. There's a lot of words that I rarely encounter, and I enjoy that aspect of the book as well. Then comes my reread, Howl's Moving Castle. I recently just rewatched the movie with my mom, and I remember just how much I liked the movie, and I decided that while the memory is fresh of how Howl and Sophie are depicted in the Ghibli film, I want to take another look at them through the eyes of the original, of the source. So this is a nice, easy read that is definitely act as a hangover book from the other two that I just showed. Then comes this something. I picked up this book because I thought that it would be tasty and, again, a light read, something that I don't really have to think about. I mean, look at the little teapot and tea kettle. It looks nice, right? It looks really nice. The contents are questionable, and I already know that this is a 1-star read, and the only reason I'm still reading this is because I'm having a hearty good time reading aloud with my mom and my brother every morning over a nice big cup of tea and just ripping this book to shreds. So it's kind of like a communal fun activity, if you will, but I cannot I might make a video on how bad this book is, because everything that you shouldn't do in writing, in my opinion, every possible thing that should not be in a piece of literature is in this book, and I don't understand how this book got published. So if anybody wants to hear my rant about this book, my uncensored rant, then feel free to let me know about that as well. And last but not least, my non-fiction for the month, not counting my university textbooks, because oh boy, are those many, and aplenty. I found this in the library. I don't think many of you know how annoying Dutch libraries are when it comes to non-fiction books, because they're just scattered around amongst all the non-Dutch books, and you just kind of have to poke around and figure out if it's in Dutch or English, because the titles are left in English, but then when you take it out, it's in Dutch. Anyway, after some trial and error, I stumbled across this, and this was recommended to me by a friend when I started university many years ago. I have a lot of questions for this book. There's literally no empirical or statistical evidence of a lot of the things that he says, so even if what he is saying or the examples that he's saying are true, it doesn't really seem like he's pulling it from a valid source, and that's really strange. And on top of that, it really feels like, despite the fact that he disclaims and underlines the well-known maxim of correlation doesn't equal causation, he doesn't really follow that in this book, and that's kind of confusing as well. But anyway, it's an interesting thing to read, because back in 2006, I think, when it was first published, if not earlier, it was quite a big hit, and, you know, why not? Especially because it does have a couple of good examples that I did come across in my economic textbooks. So, but yeah, that is my August wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me if you've read any of these books and what your opinion on them was. Do you want to hear any reviews about any of these books? And I will catch you in the next one. Bye! Bye. I'll catch you. I catch someone. Catch you later. Yeah. I will catch you in the ride.